So I'm going to be doing more unscripted videos just so I can get more videos out. So let me know if you do like this format better to the scripted version. But today we're going to be looking at players who United could potentially sign on a free at the end of the season with their contracts expiring. So the big one is obviously Alphonso Davies. And just purely from a tactical point of view and stylistic point of view, in terms of his profile, he would fit exactly what Amorim would need as a left wing back. I mean, I've been talking about Alvaro Fernandez because he's obviously a cheaper option. I mean, people are going to say, but Alvaro Fernandez is going to cost, what, £16.5 million to buy back? Whereas Alphonso Davies would be available on a free, so surely Davies is a cheaper option. When in reality, this isn't the case because Davies is reportedly commanding a salary of around £20 million a season. So just to put that into perspective, that's probably 4 times as much as what Alvaro Fernandez would be on. And that's because he's signing on a free, and you can understand it from the player's point of view. If United wanted to sign him, they'd have to pay 40, 50 million pounds if he had, say, 2 years left on his contract. So that has to be factored in. So Alphonso Davies will be coming in as one of United's highest earners. Probably, I wouldn't give him more than 15 million a season. And even if I was giving him 15 million a season, it would be mainly structured on the amount of appearances he's making, bonuses, and the actual results, like whether we're getting Champions League, winning the Premier League. I don't want to be signing players on a base salary of 18 million pounds a season like we've got with Casemiro. I just think it's just a complete waste. I mean, what if the player just declines or even gets injured? I mean, the appearance one alone is probably the most important, because if you are signing a player, you want to actually make sure they're playing. So if I was signing Alphonso Davies, yes, he fits the system perfectly as an overlapping left wing back who's going to provide winger-like output, and he's got even more defensive security behind him than he does at Bayern. And so you'd imagine that would bring the best out of him. But the issue I have with the transfer is the money it's going to cost. Now, I think Real Madrid might actually pull out of this deal. It seemed like he was going to Real Madrid maybe like a year ago. It seemed they were sizing that deal up just like they're doing with Trent Alexander-Arnold. But I think his salary might be too high for them. We've seen it with Lenny Yoro, we've seen it even with Mbappe, that they're not willing to just drop massive amounts of money. And so if United are getting Alphonso Davies, it's going to be because Real Madrid have pulled out, which is most likely going to be because of the wage that Alphonso Davies is commanding. And so that's the only issue I have with any potential deal for Davies. I would be prepared to do a deal if we could get him on like a base salary of, say, £10 million a season, and then with bonuses, say he plays 40 appearances, or he makes 40 appearances for a whole season, I'd be willing to pay him, say, 13, 14 million pounds as a salary if we're getting that many games for him. But I don't want to be paying that as a base salary, because what if he gets injured for the whole season? Then we end up in a similar situation to Luke Shaw, maybe even worse, because he'd be on double the salary. But if you have bonuses such as games played, qualification for the Champions League, Premier League, stuff like that, I'm more than happy to pay him a big salary of £15 million, because I do think he's probably, along with Teo, probably the best left wing back in world football. And so any deal for Alphonso Davies would be heavily dependent on the salary he's commanding and everything based around it, bonuses, contract length, stuff like that. So for me, until I hear what Alphonso Davies, what the structure around any potential deal is, I can't really give a definite yes or no. But if it was if the salary and everything was to my liking, he'd definitely be the left wing back I'd look to bring in. Now, before I go any further, I do have an in-game Instagram group chat which you can sign up to on my Patreon. You can also get unreleased videos, some tactical videos as well. But with the in-game Instagram group chat, we have discussions, live discussions during the Manchester United games. I'm also going to be doing Q&As, which I will be doing videos on at the start and at the end of the week. So if you want access to that, I'll leave my Patreon linked in all the usual places. Now, a more realistic free transfer that I think United should definitely be doing, with Casemiro and Eriksen surely leaving in the summer, is Frank-Andre Anguissa from Napoli. Now, he is 29-30 next November, but I don't really see that being much of an issue, because you need experience in your side, and we need players who are at their peak ability now. And if you get 2 or 3 years out of him, takes him to 32, 33, I think if you're signing him on a free and for a low salary, because he's on less than, I think, £3 million at Napoli, so even if you doubled his wage to £5-6 million a season, which for a backup central midfield player there for squad depth, is definitely something that United need to be looking to do. We can't keep going out and spending £40 million on players who aren't really improving our starting 11. We need to be signing players like Anguissa on low salaries for next to nothing, low transfer fees if possible. On this one it would be perfect because he'd be available on a free, and have them as the players who are more reliable than the likes of Mainu and some of the young players who can come in and perform over a long period of time without having to worry about a significant decline, having to worry about their massive salaries. I just think Anguissa would be perfect. Also, that's not even going into stylistics. If you look at what he offers in comparison to Eriksen or Casemiro, he's just a much better fit for Amorim's double pivot. Amorim needs players who are athletic, who are physical, and could play either alongside Mainu or Ugarte. Now, Anguissa for me is probably more of the player who would play ahead of Mainu when Mainu needs a rest. He's more of a box-to-box midfielder than sort of a sitting destroyer like Ugarte. But Anguissa is fantastic in pressing situations. He's shown this over the last few years for Napoli. But something he offers, which I think United are in dire need of, is athleticism from central midfield, particularly forward running ahead of the ball. The issue United currently have is that we don't have anyone who can run from midfield in behind the back line. I mean, Casemiro and Eriksen, if you play them two there, you're getting next to no forward movement at all. Even Mainu, he's not that kind of player who's going to pop a ball off and then drive ahead of play, making a third man run, looking to break in behind into a central position. But Anguissa does this fantastically for Napoli. And so he's not simply a pressing central midfielder who's going to be excellent in the press, but also be able to break up play in the deeper parts of the pitch in the middle and the defensive third, but also someone who's going to offer the whole system really that sort of balance it needs, because Anguissa's type of box-to-box midfielder who's going to make the runs ahead, that is subsequently going to force the opposition to either look to push up and play an offside trap, which is going to leave more space in behind for players like Anguissa to run into, or drop off to cover that sort of threat in behind, creating more space in front for the likes of Bruno Fernandes and Ahmad to receive the ball in. And so for me, Anguissa stylistically is perfect for what Amorim needs, particularly alongside someone like Ugarte, but also he's a perfect player to bridge that gap between Mainu now and Mainu in 3 or 4 years' time. See, Mainu's a fantastic player and he's probably going to be a starter, but I think we've seen what happens with Saka, what's happened with Pedri, Gavi, etc., putting far too much burden on young players, playing them far too often. It can lead to burnout, and so we do have to be aware of that with Mainu. And for me, Anguissa is a cheap option, someone who's going to be on a low salary, someone who's already in his peak. And if you actually judge Mainu now against Anguissa, there's probably not that much difference in current ability. Yes, in terms of potential, Mainu's well ahead of Anguissa, and if he gets anywhere near his potential, he'll be a better player than Anguissa ever was. But on current ability, Anguissa's still a fantastic central midfielder. It's just because of his age, you sort of subtract that from your overall perception of him. But judge him on current ability, look at him for Napoli, I think he'd come in and definitely improve this United squad, particularly if he's coming in for Eriksen or Casemiro. Just from a stylistic point of view, he's more athletic, better physically than Eriksen for sure, and a better ball carrier than both. And he's not the sort of player that I can see declining massively over the next few years. And so for me, on a free transfer, it would save funds for elsewhere. I mean, if my perfect option for central midfield would be Tijani Reinders. But if you're signing Tijani Reinders, he's going to cost £50 million most likely, maybe even more than that. You can't then afford to go out and sign another player to replace both Casemiro and Eriksen. So signing Anguissa on a free transfer, low salary, 2-3 years, from a squad building perspective, I think it's a fantastic signing, and it's just a no-brainer that United should definitely be looking to do. Now, two players I talked about potentially being signed on a free a few months ago before Amorim was appointed was Marco Verratti and Angel Gomez. Now, I have changed my mind just because I don't think either fits that double pivot, the double pivot that Amorim's going to be playing in that 3-4-3. I just don't think either have the athleticism. And I think the main thing that you need as a central midfielder in Amorim's double pivot is athleticism. We've seen it with Christian Eriksen and Casemiro. If you don't have that, if you look at someone like Anguissa, for example, yes, he's not as technically good as either Gomez or Verratti, who are much more deeper-lying playmakers, whereas Anguissa's more of a box-to-box, industrious type of midfielder. He just fits that role a lot better than those two. And so for me, I just worry about Angel Gomez, particularly in the Premier League, playing in a double pivot. Maybe you could play him in like a midfield diamond at the base as like a regista, kind of being protected in the way that Pirlo was. If you think about that Juventus diamond midfield that they would play with Pogba, Marquisio and Vidal around him, Pirlo was protected, and so we didn't really see his lack of athleticism being exploited so much. Also, he was playing in Serie A. With Angel Gomez in a midfield double pivot in the Premier League, I just don't think he has the physicality or the defensive attributes to play that role to the level needed. I think you're bringing him in as a Eriksen replacement, and yes, he probably would replace the type of creativity in terms of his progressive and incisive passing that Eriksen has, but he has the same limitations as Eriksen. So if I'm signing an Eriksen replacement, I want to be signing someone who can still replace that sort of ball progressing ability that we see from Eriksen, but he's just much better athletically. And for me, both Ferrari and Angel Gomez, they don't suit that. And so even though they are both available on a free, and just from a squad building perspective, I guess you could say Angel Gomez would be a good option, because even if you have him for a year or two, you can resell him and easily make a profit of like 20-25 million pounds at least. I just don't see him being the right fit for Amorim's system, and so it's kind of one of those transfers where on paper, before you actually look at how he's going to fit in, it seems like a good option. But for me, I think we need a different stylistic type of central midfielder, someone more like Anguissa than Angel Gomez. Now, someone who I wouldn't be opposed to signing on a free would be Sergio Reguilon, especially if we're getting rid of both Malacia and Shaw, which I think we should be doing. If we're signing someone like, I don't know, Alvaro Fernandez, for example, and Amorim wanted two left-footed left wing-backs to provide that overlap, Reguilon would be a very good option. I mean, he's only 28. He performed very well when he was here last season. I was surprised we didn't keep him on for the second half of the season, particularly with Alvaro Fernandez being sold to Benfica. And so if we were bringing someone in as like a backup left wing back to whatever left wing back we do sign, whether that's Alvaro Fernandez, whether it's Alphonso Davies, Teo, someone like that, I could see Reguilon being a very good option. He's going to be on a low transfer fee, low salary. He's not even 30 yet. He's still only 28. And he's proved at United that he can perform to a decent level. And he's probably better as a left wing back than he is as a left back, I would say. I mean, he hasn't really played much for Tottenham, but I remember him at Sevilla, even at United as well. He was a much greater threat on the overlap than someone like Malacia. And so Sergio Reguilon, I'd be happy to sign on a free. If we were to say loaning out Harry Amas, which would probably be a good idea, loan Harry Amas out, bring Reguilon in on a year or 2 year deal, and then wait for Amas to develop and then bring him back. But apart from Anguissa, there aren't any that are like standout players who I think United should be all over. I mean, the Alphonso Davies one we should definitely be looking into, but the salary is kind of putting me off. But you've even got players like Fabian Schär, who I would probably just keep Harry Maguire, just extend his contract by a year. But if we were getting rid of Maguire, Schär, I think he's 33 now, just bringing him on a year's contract could be a good option. Also, if we were going to loan out Goodwill Kokonki, personally, I would sell Lisandro Martinez, bring in someone like Nico Schotterbeck if it wasn't Bastoni, but you would still need a backup left-sided centre-back. Goodwill Kokonki would be the player I would go with next season, but Amorim may think he's only going to be 17 in February. He still hasn't made a senior appearance for United as of yet. If he was to go out on loan, I would consider bringing in someone like Kolasinac from Atalanta for a season or two, or even Reinildo Mandava from Atletico Madrid, who I haven't seen much of, but when I have seen him, he's definitely not a starter, don't get me wrong, but he's one of those players who's a decent backup option. Throughout his career, he's played as both a left back and a left-sided centre-back, and so he probably would fit that left-sided centre-back role pretty well if you had someone like Nico Schotterbeck as the first choice option. Even Kolasinac as well. I've been quite impressed when I've seen him play for Atalanta. Something I do like about Kolasinac, by the way, is his forward running. I mean, I can't remember which game it was. If I can find the clip, I'll put it up. But he plays the pass and then he just bursts forward because he has got that athleticism and pace that you would want from a left-sided centre-back. And even though he's not a starter for United by any stretch of the imagination, I think people look at him at Arsenal and think, well, that's the level he is now. But you have to realise, players do peak around like 28, maybe even slightly later. And so even if you're an average squad player for like Arsenal, at the age in your early to mid-20s, you can develop into a pretty decent Premier League player. And for me, Kolasinac under Gasperini has shown he can play as a left-sided centre-back, and he has a lot of the qualities that Amorim would want. And so if you're bringing in someone as a stopgap because you want to loan out Kokonki, you don't want to be spending big money on someone who you're probably going to have to either sell Kokonki to keep in the squad in a couple of years, or just sell outright if you can get the money back. Signing someone on a free like Kolasinac as a stopgap for that period while Kokonki develops out on loan is probably a good option. So Kokonki and Mandava would be two players I would be looking at if Goodwill Kokonki wasn't in Amorim's plans next season. So those are the main options I would be looking at if I was Manchester United. I know some people want to look at someone like Jonathan David, but I think if we are selling either Højlund or Xerxes, we need just a more elite centre forward to be brought in. And so for me, David, he just doesn't fit exactly what I would want as a replacement for either, well, it's probably going to be Xerxes, let's be real. So he wouldn't be one I would go for. You've got players like Kimmich, but again, he's probably not going to want to come anyway, but he'd be on a massive salary. He's a player approaching 30, probably the type of player United should be avoiding at this point. But let me know if there are any other free agents who you like the look of. Also, suggest me some topics so I can make future videos, and sign up to my Patreon. It'll be linked in all the usual places.